It's the week ending Friday the 15th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Keir Starmer meeting Volodymyr Zelensky ahead of a Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, Nicola Sturgeon releasing Frankly, her much-talked-about memoir, and A-Level Results Day, which saw a record number of students getting into their first choice of university. Congratulations to all of them. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Arian McNichol. Let's unwrap the week. And with Ollie away for one more week, joining me today from the Week's digital team, it's Jamie Timson, senior editor of The Week Junior, Felicity Capon, and sitting in for Harriet Marsden this week, we welcome back BBC journalist Julia McFarlane. And Julia, do you remember getting your A-level results? And if so, do you have any advice for our younger listeners?
Well, the first year that I got my AS level results, I bombed 2 of my subjects because I was too busy having fun and I had to retake all of them in the following year. I would just say my school years were so great, but I think some of the best things I did for myself back then was I really identified my interests. And I think that is the bigger test of that age. If you can work out which direction generally you want to head in, everything else can follow on from there. And I think exams are just one day, but having the wisdom and knowing yourself to know where you want to go is infinitely more important.
Totally good and sage advice. My own addition, if you didn't get the grades you want, just remember podcasting doesn't require any qualifications whatsoever. Okay, Felicity, you're actually up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
I think it could be remembered for the path to peace, aka the Trump route for international peace and prosperity.
Many tried to find a resolution, including the European Union. The Russians worked very hard on it, never happened. Sleepy Joe Biden tried, but you know what happened there. He tried for probably 12 minutes and didn't work out. And many other countries tried, and they were unsuccessful. But with this accord, we've finally succeeded in making peace.
Donald Trump sinking the boot into Joe Biden, as he loves to do at the White House, sat between the Azerbaijani and Armenian presidents. Felicity, what's the story?
Yeah, so the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia have signed a peace pledge. Emphasis on the word pledge, not deal or agreement, because a lot of critics think there's still quite a lot to do. But ostensibly they have, for the time being, ended the conflict between their two nations. And this is one of the longest running conflicts on the globe. It's been going on between them for absolutely decades. So the Azerbaijani president and the Armenian prime minister, they were in the White House last Friday to sign this pledge, which Trump has called historic. And this week, the actual text of the pledge was released for everyone to pore over and to see what's going to happen next between these two feuding nations.
Yeah, if you could just bring us up to speed briefly, what is the background to this conflict?
It's quite complicated, but basically, Azerbaijan and Armenia have fought over Nagorno-Karabakh, which is an ethnically Armenian enclave in Azerbaijan. They fought in the 1980s and the 1990s. This is a territory that lies in the mountainous South Caucasus region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. There's been frequent clashes. In 2023, Azerbaijan took over this area. There's been casualties on both sides. There's been prisoners of wars, like hundreds of thousands of casualties. It's been a big deal. So it's all over territory.
Julia, Armenia actually had returned some villages to Azerbaijan in 2024. Is it possible that this peace deal would have happened even without Trump?
It is possible, but I think what is almost the most telling about this conflict is not where we are within the relations between the Azeris and the Armenians themselves, but more how this conflict is being seen in the wider geopolitical map. And I think one thing that is at the top of the Trump agenda and part of the people around him in his cabinet is during the Joe Biden years, they saw a retreat of the United States in many important arenas around the world. Notably, during the Joe Biden years, President Xi of China was very, very active in marching ever onwards with its soft power Belt and Road Initiative. And there was a lot of focus on expanding Chinese influence in Central Asia and in the South Caucasus, particularly at a time when sea routes were being disrupted by the global supply chain crisis by the Houthis in Yemen, disrupting a lot of global trade. The Chinese have been really working on solidifying relations between the Kazakhs, between Uzbekistan, and between Georgia and Azerbaijan and Armenia. They're trying to widen their sphere of influence. So what do we get when we see Trump 2.0? He wants to broker trade deals. He wants to broker peace deals. He wants to get America back to its sort of geopolitical influence as the number one, global hegemon in all spheres around the world. And I think this is part of it. I think it's also interesting that you've had a lot of high-profile interventions on this. We all remember perhaps Kim Kardashian making her White House appeal on behalf of Armenia. Her father has Armenian roots, and she's very much on that side. But the other thing is the Azerbaijani relationship with Russia and their close ties is another reason for the US to take an interest in this conflict, to perhaps align with Armenia to counter Russian influence. So I think that there are so many sort of tangled threads to look at in this conflict.
Yeah, I mean, call me cynical, perhaps, but one wonders whether Trump could even have found Azerbaijan and Armenia on a map a few weeks ago. I mean, Jamie, is this all part of Trump's kind of unexpected quest to win a Nobel Peace Prize? Is that what's motivating his involvement here?
You didn't used to be so cynical, Arian. What happened?
This podcast has changed me.
Yeah, absolutely. What were those halcyon days of your A-levels? I think it's interesting with Trump and the Peace Prize. I think he obviously, there's lots of stuff that would suggest that it was actually Obama that caused this whole Trump situation upon us by him taking the piss out of him in the White House Correspondents' Dinner that then saw Trump decide to run for presidency.
That's his villain's origin story.
Exactly. It now seems like he's trying to ape Obama once again by going for the Nobel Peace Prize. It's interesting, I think, as you were saying, Arian, particularly in this deal, it is kind of built off the back of efforts from Joe Biden. I think the White House would say that he wasn't obviously able to get it over the line, but a lot of the agreements had already been agreed by the Azeris and the Armenians previous to Trump getting involved. I saw a thing that the White House said that Trump has thus far stopped 6 wars, and he's stopped about an average of about a war a month, referencing the conflict between India and Pakistan, Thailand and Cambodia, the Congo and Rwanda. So he is obviously positioning himself in that way. How it kind of works within the context of America First and the kind of MAGA backing that he's had is an interesting one. He's obviously seen it as a kind of a feather in his cap to be seen to be stopping wars. But at the same time, he's obviously pulling out a lot of funding from US aid, which we've talked about on this podcast before, and still, professing to put America first. But maybe this is his idea is it aligns with America First because it's showing how America has power in these regions and not Russia or not China.
Yeah, I mean, none of this obviously happened in a vacuum. Julia, you mentioned the involvement of China, but also for more than a century, the Kremlin has played a really significant role of both power and peace broker in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. Felicity, does this signify, like this particular moment, does it signify that the US is expanding its influence in the region kind of at the expense of Russia?
Yeah, I certainly think it does. I mean, as you were saying, the last agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan was crafted by Putin. And historically, Moscow has really sought to extend its influence in the region. And even with these peace talks, it has tried to insert its interests. But actually, both sides, both Armenia and Azerbaijan, they abandoned those proposals in favor of an American solution. So yeah, Russia has been really, really sidelined over this. And its response has been cool, to say the least. It's sort of cautiously welcomed peace in the region, but it has warned against foreign interference, which is obviously a dig at the US. So yeah, it's definitely Russia being sidelined. And it's interesting that Armenia and Azerbaijan went to America, and then they have both been sort of singing Trump's praises, and they have both nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. So you can definitely see lots of leaders at the moment sort of being sycophants, really, and sort of seeing themselves sucking up to Trump, which you could, argue that there's other things going on there. And then other country in this, which is also quite important to mention, is Iran. So Iran shares a border with both countries, and some of the aspects of the pledge really affects Iran, because the idea is that they're going to open up this corridor, which also affects Turkey. It's opening up a corridor between Azerbaijan and its Nakhchivan exclave. And that sort of runs very, very close to the Iranian border. And Iran is absolutely furious about the idea that there's going to be more American influence. It's a hot potato.
Yeah. Julia, is Iran right to be worried about this?
I think Iran is looking at the wider geopolitical map and also concerned about security on its borders. It does want to have good relations with both neighbors, and there were lots of Iranians who fled over the borders when there was Israeli airstrikes on Iran this summer. And I think something else that's also really interesting is the growing and rather quiet involvement of Turkey. And Turkey, who have been increasingly intervening in conflicts in the region. They sent troops to Syria and gained territory in 2019. They got involved in the Libyan civil war. Turkey's major rival is Russia, which is also has been involved in this conflict. Turkey has thrown its support behind Azerbaijan. The Azeri population there is a Turkish ethnic group. Their languages are extremely close. And so I think the relationship between the Armenians and the Russians is something that is, has occurred to Turkey, that there is an opportunity for them. The proxy nature of this conflict, like so many others, I think in some ways can prove a benefit, in that there are more players willing to broker ceasefires and to end cycles of violence. But no player that's involved in this is doing this for altruistic reasons.
Yeah, well, the curiosity is that there are so many players in a funny way, and yet it's Trump, Jamie, who's been successful here, where plenty of others have failed. Is he actually a bit of an underappreciated deal maker, even though that's the thing that he likes to talk about himself most of all? But are we underestimating his ability to solve conflicts that have been raging for a long time?
Yeah, it's interesting to use the term underappreciated and Trump, isn't it, in the same sentence? I mean, there's a key things about this that Felicity mentioned at the beginning, which is that it's just a pledge. There needs to be follow through. It does really benefit the US. They've got 99-year development rights over the corridor that has basically solved the issue, that will be governed under Armenian law, but operated commercially by a US subleased consortium. So there is obviously money in this, and money is a key facet to everything that Trump seems to want to get involved in. As to the question of the kind of art of the deal, I think while you're talking about global conflicts that he has got involved in, the kind of big elephant, or two elephants in the room, if a room can hold two elephants, the Ukraine and Gaza. And these are two issues that he hasn't yet been able to find a way through and to solve. And I wonder if his focus on all of these other small, potentially less in the news conflicts is a way of trying to distract from the fact that he hasn't solved the two big issues. And then potentially, even if he is, I mean, he's privately said that he wants to win the Nobel Prize. If he's unable to solve, the issues in Gaza and the Ukraine, does that leave him in a position where he's unable potentially to win it? He actually said in his book, in The Art of the Deal, he wrote, "I keep a lot of balls in the air because most deals fall out, no matter how promising they seem at first." And that kind of numbers game look at the world is maybe how he views it. Okay, so Trump obviously hasn't been successful in all of the deals that he's been involved in negotiating, but is this peace deal likely to hold, Felicity?
It remains to be seen. I mean, there's still a lot, as Jamie was saying, there's still a lot to figure out. And I think one of the things that could prove a problem is that Azerbaijan has said there's further actions that are required to sign the peace agreement. So they've only initialed everything. They haven't actually signed it. And Azerbaijan wants to see an amendment to Armenia's constitution that would eliminate territorial claims against Azerbaijan. I'm not sure Armenia's going to go for that. So there's a lot of kind of the right thing is being said. And that's, that is something within itself, but there is still some way to go. So it remains to be seen, I think.
Okay. On the way, North Korean workers are making their way to Russia, but all is not as it seems. That's after this. Okay, Julia, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
For some North Koreans, it's from Russia with no love.
처음에는 러시아에 간다는 것. I was excited to go to Russia, to travel abroad and earn money. But once I started working, I felt like I was in a labor camp, a prison without bars. I was terrified when I woke up each morning. My hands would seize shut, paralyzed from the day before.
A North Korean worker who has defected to South Korea speaking to the BBC on Wednesday. Julia, what's the story?
So, we are continuing to cover the many ways in which the Russia-Ukraine war is taking a very strong toll on both those two countries. But the impact is growing. And an interesting story from North Korea. We have seen over the course of the last few years, first North Korea supporting its ally Russia by sending ammunition. Then it started to send soldiers. Now it's sending thousands of construction workers to help fill a huge labour shortage, which has been created by the war. And this week, South Korean intelligence officials told the BBC that some 10,000 workers were sent to Russia last year, and that they were actually expecting many more to arrive, up to around 50,000 in total. Now, it's quite normal for North Korea to send people abroad in terms of seeking work overseas. Overseas remittances were a way for Kim Jong-un to fund his regime. And up until 2019, it was quite common for manual labourers and workers from North Korea to work legitimately overseas. But in 2019, the UN convened sanctions banning the use of North Korean labour because of the really quite horrific working conditions they were found to be enduring. And so from then, there has been a huge drop-off. But what we're seeing now is many North Koreans being lured to Russia in a way that will sound a lot like other instances of human trafficking. There are advertised as work opportunities in Russia, and that they will be paid a certain amount and that accommodation is provided for. But when they get there, they find that they are expected to put up with 18, 19, 20-hour-a-day working days, that they are sort of packed into these steep high rises. And some of them have managed to talk to the BBC, escaping from Russia, that the conditions that they have found themselves in Russia bear resemblance to the labour camps back in their home country.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, obviously this is a pretty grim situation that Julia paints of what working conditions are like once they get to Russia. But is it really that different from the impoverished world many of them would have left behind in North Korea before they came over there?
Yes, it's a difficult one to, the two awful situations. And I guess that the reason that the lure of leaving North Korea could be part of the reason that people are going. It stems from, as Julia was saying, it stems from this pact that North Korea and Russia have had, that a kind of mutual defense pact. Reports have shown that they were kind of given Russian uniforms if they were going to fight, and then issued fake IDs to obscure their origin. So there's not a lot of legitimacy that they are being given when they're sent over there. I think another interesting facet to this is, just why Russia needs this number of people. There was an interesting article in Bloomberg this week that was showing just how kind of decimated the Russian economy is. Russian companies will need to hire the equivalent of 2 million workers a year over the next 5 years to fill the vacancies and to deal with the loss of working age population through the war. So while on the one hand we've obviously got this horrific conditions that the North Koreans are in, it does shine a light also on the state of the society and economy in Russia.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the bits that caught my eye as well, that labour shortage angle to the story. But what was curious to me is that Russia is a country of 143 million odd people. I mean, even presupposing that figure of 1 or 2 million Russians killed or injured since the start of the Ukraine war is correct, that still leaves a vast majority of the population. How can there be a shortage of workers, Felicity?
I mean, you're right. It's a very big country with a very big population, but it is the toll of the war that is it's sort of grinding Russia down. I mean, it's not just the Russian troops who've been killed or wounded. It's also the numbers who have fled the country. And it's the economy, the Russian economy, which is still doing okay, but it is slowing down. It is starting to stabilize. So, and these North Koreans, it's not just construction. They're also involved in clothing factories and IT companies. They're definitely helping to boost Russia, basically. And at the same time, they're sending money back to North Korea. They have to pay these loyalty sums of money back to North Korea too. So both countries are benefiting in some way at the expense of these workers who are just in the most, deplorable conditions, working very dangerous shifts, working very long shifts, and they can't really get home. They don't really have a lot of say in, what they're doing day to day.
Julia, it's not just North Koreans as well. I gather you've been hearing about how Indians are being tricked into not just working for Russia, but fighting for them. How's that happening?
Yeah, so this is another sort of recent phenomenon that, again, also has sort of vibes of human trafficking. There is a growing number of Indian nationals who are sort of tricked into fighting for Russia. And this week on the BBC, we looked at the case of a few Indians who told us of their experiences. Yeah, and this really reminded me also of how ISIS recruited foreign nationals, using people with blogs or social media profiles to try and lure people to make the journey. And there was this a YouTuber who was an Indian man based actually he was based in Dubai, and he was called Khan. And on his YouTube channel, he would offer well-paid work across a number of countries, even for low-skilled Indians. And some of these blog posts advertised what was described as a security helper role, some kind of security guard role. And, he said that Indians could earn hundreds of thousands of rubles every month working in logistics, way behind the front lines. And, he said that the Russian government was appreciative of other people helping in its army, that people would be given benefits, and that you would be given, permanent residency, all this sort of thing. And this Khan, he filmed in the streets of St. Petersburg and Moscow, and really tried to draw up this vision of a new life that Indians could build in Russia. Now, what some of these Indians found was that they were given uniforms and promptly told that they were going to be sent to the front lines, and before too long there would be, guns and ammunitions handed to them. And this is, part of a wider issue, not just for Indians, not just for North Koreans, but also for normal Russians, because as big as the Russian population is, as we've heard, that they are running out of cannon fodder basically to send into the Ukrainian meat grinder. And we don't know really how many people have died in Russia, but we do know from some of the moves by the Russian government that they are running out of people. They were recruiting from prisons, they were recruiting from juvenile detention centers. They have also been hiring mercenaries from nearly 50 countries. Just last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree allowing foreigners to serve in the Russian army, not just during a state of emergency or martial law, fully integrated, rather than being contractors or casual mercs for hire. And the state of the Russian economy, I think, is now at a stage where the Russian government is going to have to make some serious decisions soon. We saw the IMF degraded their forecast for the Russian economy. They slashed it. The budget deficit has exploded. You've got to remember that the Russians spend more than 45% on defense and security. And despite the fact that they're still managing to sort of get around sanctions, they've got new customers for their energy exports. The cost of the Russian war, the brain drain of people leaving the country, all of this there is another war of attrition that is being fought inside Russia itself, not just on the front lines.
Yeah, but even so, on the front lines, as you say, there are these people coming from all over the world. Jamie, which nationalities are showing up on the Ukrainian battlefield, and why are they coming?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's actually on both sides. You've got a kind of wide variety of nationalities. On the kind of Ukrainian side, you've got the post-Soviet volunteers, fighters from Belarus, Georgia, North Caucasus, whose kind of motivations are resistance really to Russian rule. Similarly, you've got Western volunteers. It's called the International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine, which has volunteers from over 30 countries: India, Australia, Canada, France, Japan. This is all on Ukraine's side. Really a kind of question about solidarity. There is also adventure. People do feel like a sense of thirst for unfortunately for war, for wanting to go out and face action. And then on the Russian side, we've obviously been talking about the mercenaries. Over 1,000 Nepalese have joined Russian ranks, drawn by the promises of high salaries of around $4,000 a month, as well as smaller numbers of Indians, Sri Lankans, and then your kind of traditional allies of Russia, Cuba, Serbia, China, a number of these. It's a kind of massive amount of different nationalities, all for their own kind of personal reasons. But it does make you realize quite how almost World War-ish it is. It might not involve us or our military boots on the ground, but there are people there from across the globe that are fighting in this situation.
I think that was my feeling as well. It feels, Felicity, like a challenge to our understanding of modern warfare as something that's like distant and abstract. Does it change the way we feel about war in the modern world when we see it sweeping up fighters from all over the globe?
I mean, I certainly think it's very easy to see it as Russia versus Ukraine. And actually, when you look into all the detail and you realise the complexity of the different nationalities taking part, and you sort of think this takes on a whole different dimension. And I think the North Korea aspect is really, really important, because as Russia is increasingly isolated from the West, both economically and diplomatically, you're seeing this unprecedented collaboration between Moscow and Pyongyang, and that's only strengthening and getting stronger. And particularly when you think that North Korea has been such a pariah. We were talking earlier about the United Nations banning countries from using North Korean workers because of the fear that it would add to Kim's funds and his ability to build nuclear weapons. The fact that this friendship is being reignited and really being strengthened, I think is an element, an aspect of the war that is certainly being underplayed, and probably one of the most dangerously underplayed aspects of the war that we should probably be keeping an eye on more so.
Okay, on the way, Pamela Anderson is in one hell of a pickle. Okay, Jamie, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, we were all briny, happy people.
No, Pamela's pickles.
As pickles and jam, and I do want to get to the movie, has pickles and jam been a big part of your life, or did this sort of come along later?
Oh, no, my aunt won all the pickles and mustard awards, actually, on Vancouver Island. So I come from a long line of picklers.
You and Harold, is it a love of pickles?
Yes.
Okay.
Pamela Anderson on Late Night with Seth Meyers back in January of this year. So, Jamie, what's the story this week?
Pamela Anderson's pickles. It was quite amusing there that she said she came from a long line of pickles, which threw up some interesting imagery there from your Baywatch days. She's launched a limited edition line of her spicy pickles this week, currently priced at, I'm going to give you a guess, do you think it's more or less than $30 a jar, Arian? Actually, everyone can jump in.
I mean, it has to be... The reason you're asking is that it's going to be more, but it should be less, right?
It's $38 a jar.
Correct.
Isn't that wild? I'm not just following the ins and outs of Pamela Anderson's life here. I'm bringing it to the table because it is a good example of how pickles are everywhere. I don't know if you've noticed, but they are the food trend of the year. Just to bring it back to the UK, 16% year-on-year increase from Ocado for pickle sales. Searches for pickles on Waitrose website have gone up 123% in the last year. Tesco have said that they needed to increase the range of pickles and fermented foods it stocks by 2/3 in the past year. We have gone absolutely pickling mad.
Okay, quick point of order here. You can pickle pretty much anything. Are we talking about all pickle kind, or are we talking about just kind of gherkins?
I think we're talking about what my granddad used to call wallies in Cockney lingo, which is a pickled gherkin. And you could get it from fish and chip shops. And he would always ask me to pick up a wally. Well, he wouldn't ask me because I was 10 years old or whatever. My mum would pick up a wally for him at the fish and chip shop. So I believe we are talking about pickled gherkins in general. But obviously, there has actually been since... I think really since COVID, there's been a kind of fascination with fermentation and fermented things. That's been another big food trend. Obviously, fermentation has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. I wasn't claiming that it just started in 2020.
Well, your grandfather was obviously ahead of his time, but pickles, it strikes me, Felicity, they're not like kale or quinoa or like chia seeds or these foodstuffs that seem to arrive in our consciousness all of a sudden. Pickles have been around, as Jamie was just saying, forever. Why is everyone suddenly eating loads of them?
I think a number of things can explain this. I mean, there has been a lot of influence from Korea recently. I mean, we did a podcast a while ago about how cool Korea is, all Korean culture. And they're big into their pickles and their fermentation and all that sort of thing. So I think, foods like kimchi and, other pickled goodies have become very, very popular. And the same with Scandinavia, where pickling is also has been a tradition, for forever, really. And I think Scandinavian cuisine became very, very cool. I think there's also just something fun about pickles, right? Like it just lends itself to loads of memes. It's slightly phallic. They're just a bit silly and a bit naughty. And the number of toddlers I see walking around with Mama's Little Pickle emblazoned on their t-shirt. So I think pickles are just sort of, fun, basically. But I do think it's ironic because, when we talk about the price of how much Pamela Anderson is selling them for, that they've sort of become this like luxury product that, a lot of ordinary people wouldn't be able to afford. But it is going back to something ancestral, the idea of surviving, very harsh winters, that you'd have to pickle and preserve and salt everything in the spring or the summer months in order to get you through the winter. It's sort of, it's growing and storing food for necessity rather than luxury. So I think that's really ironic in a way that that's now becoming this very expensive luxury product that, it was never supposed to be.
Yeah, well, okay, so Felicity's thrown up a few theories about the history of pickles, about their cuteness and the phallic quality. I mean, one of the other things I heard floated was that it's kind of a health-related thing, Julia. Is there a health benefit to eating pickled foods and specifically wallies?
I think This is an excellent story for the Week Unwrapped. I actually think Felicity and Jamie, all of our topics have been really interesting. But I have to pay tribute to Jamie because I love a story that, on the one hand, purports to be about a simple subject, but actually, on further inspection, it can also tell a much deeper story about society and where we are at the moment. And I think what is so interesting about this pickle, particularly what Felicity says about, this is something that goes back many, many years, and there is a sort of historic traditional sort of aspect about this. First of all, in some of the articles that have been looking at the pickle trend and, talking to, culinary trend experts, all cited that a lot of this is being driven by Gen Z. I still say Gen Z, not Gen Z. Gen Z craze and their appetite for not just big flavors, but also the health conscious benefits of it, the fermentation, but also the fact that you can also have a personality cult about this. And so many trends and so many things that we see on Instagram that become our next big craze, whether it's Labubu dolls or whether it's matcha or whether it's pickles or whether it's whatever, I think something bigger is happening, which is that social media is increasingly driving our discovery of everything. We are now sort of force-fed new trends on a conveyor belt of our algorithms rather than coming across them in the daily course of our lives. We're at sort of peak convenience era. We sort of lay back and have everything delivered to us. And one thing that I think is very interesting, an impact of all of this, there was a story on the BBC this week that was about how AI is potentially starting to impact doctors' skills. And it found that those who used AI-assisted programs to spot cancerous growths were less effective to spot these without them. And the question was, is AI potentially damaging the very skills that they're built to ostensibly support? Now, bear with me, this is relevant because I think what we are seeing with this renewed interest in these sort of old-fashioned things like, the long art of pickling, is that many people are increasingly, subconsciously perhaps, rejecting this and moving towards some of these old traditional practices and pastimes. We're seeing like the rise of homesteading, even natalism, the growth of slow hobbies like gardening and traditional crafts, things you cannot look up on Amazon, click and have delivered by a drone in the next few hours. I think all of this in some way is representing a backlash against our new technological age. There is no way to fast track a pickle. You have to go through the process, which, to be fair, is probably why Pamela Anderson thinks she can charge nearly $40, because pickling takes time. There is no technological shortcut to that as of yet. And I think it's so interesting because everywhere you look, you are seeing people slowly rejecting so much of our modern lifestyles and trying to move back into slower and perhaps environmentally smaller ways of life.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so Jamie, Julia has raised a whole new can of pickles.
You know what?
There.
I just thought it was because Wally's looked a bit like Willy's. That was
right.
That was the thing I thought the people were interested in. But
according to her analysis, it's not as simple as pickles are supposedly good for hangovers, which is one of the other hypotheses that's being promoted on social media. What do you think of that? Do you think this is something about people's return to the old ways, the better ways?
I think I had another theory that's quite linked to that, but I was going to get on my soapbox about, which was more about food trends and things like that. But it's certainly a very appealing suggestion. And I think when I was referencing COVID, that was kind of what I was suggesting, was that a lot, and people know that from anecdotes from everyone that I knew, that when lockdown happened, suddenly people got into baking. They started growing things on their windowsills. They were going back to kind of traditional or slightly more esoteric pursuits, while at the same time also spending a lot of time on their phones and showing people the very esoteric things that they were doing while on lockdown. And everyone was living in this very intense bubble that kind of, it seemed a way of getting peace, I guess. So I do agree with what Julia was saying. I think the other thing is a little bit about this, is this kind of chase constantly with food trends to get something a little bit, a slightly more interesting take, or a little bit more spicy, or a little bit more, a kind of constant optimization that I think probably exists across culture now in every realm of like, oh, we can just tweak this recipe, or we can just tweak this addition, this thing that you're doing. Because everyone wants to achieve this peak goal. Everyone is straining for this idea of, enlightenment through, be it the best version of a matcha latte that they can get, be it the best pickle that they can create. It's quite scary in some respects that, this hyper optimization that we're the world that we're living in. Equally, I think there's something, as Felicity said, there is something quite fun about pickles, and in a way maybe we shouldn't be. It's not that deep, as young people would say.
Julia, are you into fad foods? Have you ever waited in line for a cronut or a cupcake or a TikTok famous sandwich?
I'm probably not the best person to ask this question because I grew up in Indonesia and Singapore, and so my palate is quite complicated because from a very young age it was very, very dominated by very, very strong flavors. And I think part of the food fads, particularly you see it a lot in the West, are because of the rise of globalization and the opening up of whole different food markets and global culinary experiences. A lot of these trends, with the exception of pickles, to be fair, which does have its roots, in the colder climates up in Europe, but things like matcha, things, like ramen, all these sort of food crazes are often sort of global food crazes. And what is also interesting, which was a question which was posed in a New York Times article, opinion piece about why everyone is eating pickles now, asked the question about hyper flavor, and are we in an era of hyper flavor, which I thought was so interesting because we are sort of peak Technicolor age, aren't we? And you only just have to look at, for example, not just food adverts, which are so sort of painfully vibrant that they give you a headache by looking at them. But, following on from our conversation about nostalgia and harking back to old practices, I saw an advert on Instagram the other day of the old original Disney movies. And what was so immediately apparent was that compared to today's modern movies, the palette is quite muted. And, you just put on Peppa Pig and it's like, whoa, hyperstimulation. And which is something that studies that people are starting to look at now. This era of sensory overload and the fact that we are now sort of trained to require complexity and even more intense flavors, even more umami, even more bite. And, in some ways you're seeing a rejection of that by going back to a simple sort of one-dimensional flavor, which is the sharp, acidic bite of a pickle, which only has, two ingredients, the vegetable, the water, and the salt.
Well, I'm afraid it's time for me to return to my single flavour existence. My thanks to Jamie, Felicity and Julia. You are all hyper-flavoured guests in your own way. And remember, you can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including now on YouTube where you can watch us too. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Arian McNichol. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.